James Riggall, it's a name many in the tech or startup space in Tassie will know well. James is behind such things as Enterprize, a collaborative space for entrepreneurs and startups, BitLink, the list goes on. And for the last few months, he's been in America on a Fullbright Scholarship. They're actually a pretty big deal. He can probably explain it best, so I'll let him do that. Also with James is his partner, Jessie Martin, who spent a couple of months with James over in the US, so we'll get her thoughts as well. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon, Pia. It's good to see you.
Lovely to see you back on Tassie soil. Now, James, first, for those listeners who don't know, what is a Fullbright Scholarship?
Yeah, so a Fullbright Scholarship, the Fullbright program was set up after World War II with the sale of arms from kind of the closing up of that war, and all of the leftover arms and all of that sort of thing was sold. There was all of this money left over, and a guy called Senator Fullbright proposed that some of that money be used to set up a program that would basically create an academic exchange. So it would take people from the United States, where the program is based, to other places all over the world for long stays, so periods of 6 to 12 or longer months, and then it would take people from all over the world to the United States for a period of time as well. So there's a whole range of different ways in which this program works. Sometimes it's people going to study a PhD in a foreign university, and then in my case I was actually visiting as a visiting scholar. So I went from Australia to Bellevue, which is just near Seattle, and worked for a college called Bellevue College for 9 months, and basically just settled right in as though I had worked at that college for a while. So I just kind of went there as visiting faculty, taught some classes, got involved in some other projects. It's a really exciting program, and going back to its kind of historic roots, it was really about this idea that if we could take smart, driven, excited people from all over the world to the United States, and from the United States to all over the world, and allow them to experience a different culture, build connections, and so on, then maybe we would be a little bit less likely to get into these massive conflicts, because we would understand one another a little better. So it's a noble idea, and I think it works to a point.
We'll keep an eye on the news for that, I think. What were the big takeaways for you spending this 9 months or so there?
It was such an incredible experience, and I'm extremely grateful to the Fullbright program, and just the fact that this exists at all is kind of amazing. The fact that I was able to benefit from receiving one is just incredible, and I'm extremely grateful for that. It's very hard to quickly and succinctly kind of summarize all of the great things that came from it. I met probably thousands of people. I managed to travel, I was based in Seattle, but I managed to travel around the US and spend some time in Canada as well. So I was able to learn a lot. The US is a fascinating place. It's very hard, having spent quite a bit of time there, it's very hard to even think about it as one country. It's so big, it's so diverse. There's so much going on there that really I feel like I've spent 9 months and I've barely scratched the surface of what's going on in the US. Of course, my 9 months was mostly spent in Seattle, which many listeners will be aware is where Boeing started. It's where Microsoft is based. It's where Amazon is based. And so for me, having kind of my interest in technology and education and startups and all of these sorts of things, I like to describe to people as being in Seattle for 9 months is like standing on top of a hill. You can see further into the future from that place than you can just about anywhere else that I've ever been. So that was really exciting.
So what does that future look like?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of what I was doing while I was over there was focused on virtual reality, and that's a particularly interesting area for people in Seattle because Microsoft is based there. They have some interesting products that are kind of evolving in the VR area, but then Google have a lot of their VR team there. Facebook own a company called Oculus Rift that makes VR headsets. They're based in Seattle. The research team for Oculus is based in Seattle as well. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the future of virtual reality and augmented reality, this idea of kind of allowing us to immerse ourselves in another simulated environment, being able to be in there with other people. I looked at a lot of interesting things around social virtual reality. So instead of having a Skype call or having a phone call, that you might be able to inhabit an avatar, drop into VR with someone else on the other side of the planet, and interact with them there. That seems to be a new frontier that's evolving right now. But if if you then take that idea to augmented reality, so the idea that you can take digital information or virtual objects and superimpose them on top of the real world. So as I look around, I can see these virtual things. Imagine if you're sitting at a table and your friend is sitting across from you and there are two empty seats at the table, and because you're both wearing magic glasses that have this augmented reality technology built in, you can conjure up one of your friends who lives in Seattle and another friend who lives in London, and they can sit at the table with you and you can all sit down and have a meal together. This is kind of some of the stuff that when you're in a place like Seattle, not only does that feel like an accessible future, you meet people who are building that sort of stuff. It's really amazing.
It sounds very space age and sort of Jetsons, but it sounds like when you're there, as you say, it's a reality and it's happening as we speak. You visited a lot of startups, or also bigger tech companies, as you've mentioned as well. How does Tassie compare when it comes to innovation?
So I think this is one of those areas where I suppose I have complex views on it, and it's hard to summarise it quickly, but we are both doing better and worse than perhaps I thought. You know, it's one of those things where I got there and what I realised was all of what we understand as best practice, we weren't wrong about those things. You know, like when I visited Boulder in Colorado, which has the highest engagement in startup activity per capita of anywhere in the world, when I spoke to people there and I met people and I learned about how did that come to be and what are the principles that you followed and how did all of this work, you find basically that what we're doing and the path that we're on in Tasmania is the right path. And I think that we will get there eventually. So that was really exciting and that was heartening for me. But then you also learn about kind of the work that's left to be done. And I think we have some cultural issues in Australia more generally, but also Tasmania, where I think we really need as a community to support one another more, compete less, you know, focus on the bigger picture and really...
tall poppy syndrome that we're talking about?
I think so, yeah. I think that is definitely a real thing in Australia. I know we have kind of the stereotype in Australia of the kind of American ego where everyone just kind of, you know, the idea of the loudmouth American tourist who's kind of very full of themselves and that sort of thing. I didn't see a lot of that sort of behaviour while I was there. But people in America, particularly in the startup and the tech scene and so on, if they're good at something, they'll say they're good at something. You know, if they're not very good at something, they'll be honest about that as well. They'll figure out ways to work together. And I think that's something that we can really learn from. When I was in Boulder, they have a philosophy there which they refer to as their give first philosophy. And it's really an idea that when you meet someone, you should be looking for an opportunity to help them. You should figure out, how are my strengths relevant to this person? And I don't think we do that nearly enough. What's exciting is when everyone does it, it feels like magic. It feels like no matter how much you put in, you're going to get more out because everyone's looking for an opportunity to help you. So I would love to see more of that in Tasmania.
It's 14 to 5 on ABC Northern Tasmania. You're with Pia this afternoon on Drive. And the voice you're hearing is James Riggall. He's big in tech, innovation, startup. I think if I was to fully give him all his titles, it would just about take the rest of the time we've got. But he's been in America for the last 9 months on a Fullbright Scholarship. We're hearing what that experience has been like, what he's learned, and we're going to come back to James in just a moment. We're just going to have a brief break with Peter Blakely. By James Riggall. He's been in America for the last 9 months or so on a Fullbright Scholarship, having an incredible time, some amazing opportunities by the sounds of things. Also with him is Jessie Martin. Now, Jessie is James's partner, joined him over there for a few months as well. Jessie also works in the steam engine at LC, which is, I think, what they call a maker space. We've heard a bit from James so far about his experience over there. Jessie, what was your experience of being in America and visiting some of these amazing places?
So it was a lot better than what I expected, and it was nice to see. So we visited some makerspaces over there while we were travelling around, and we visited the Google Makerspace. We visited one at the Pacific Science Centre called the Tinker Tank, and then we visited the on-campus one at Bellevue College, and it was good to see that we were doing the right thing. So we were incorporating all kinds of different methods of learning, all kinds of materials and equipment, just to make sure that we were hitting all the marks and giving our students the best opportunity to learn in our facility. So it was good to take some notes back and see that we were doing a good job.
An amazing opportunity to, I guess, get that world stage to compare yourself against. A lot of people don't get that often. Of course, America, you've been there for 9 months now. There's been a fair bit going on in that 9 months when we think of America. I mean, certainly in terms of the news coverage is here, I would say the top three would be guns, Facebook, or Donald Trump. What was it like? I mean, how did you guys experience and perceive those discussions in the US?
So I was very concerned you were going to ask me to pick one to talk about because they're all very dicey things to talk about. One of the things being I mentioned earlier, the US is so big and so wide and so varied that it has a lot of kind of subcultures and subclimates and so on within it. And certainly for us being on the West Coast in Seattle, that's a very liberal part of the country. People, as a general rule, in my day-to-day experience, didn't really want to talk about, for example, what the president was up to. Like, you know, the really, really bad stuff would kind of hit people would feel they needed to talk about it. But most of all, I think people just kind of were working under the assumption that this was a stage that would pass, and as long as they kind of kept doing what they were doing, that you know, they would kind of get through it. So that was interesting. The gun stuff was really confronting. Like, one of the things working in a college over there, obviously a lot of the shootings that make the news are school shootings. The US has something like a school shooting every week. It's really incredible. I had active shooter training alongside sexual harassment training and how to use the learning management system on campus within my first few weeks. I was carrying a key that was called an emergency lock key, so that would lock any door on campus. If there was an active shooter, I was able to lock myself inside any office, whether that office was mine or not. So that sort of stuff was really confronting. I had a house that was quite close to campus, and to walk from campus to my office, I walked past the main flagpole that the college had. That flag was at half-mast, maybe not once a week, but definitely once a month, and probably a little bit more frequently than that. And occasionally I didn't know why. And I always made a point of, okay, I'm going to go away, I'm going to look that up, I'm going to find out why is the flag at half-mast today. To memory, the only time it wasn't a shooting was shortly after Barbara Bush died. Every other time it was a shooting of some kind somewhere. So living with that is really difficult. I found I thought about school shootings and windows and, you know, where lines of sight were and where students congregated. Those were things that I thought about a lot while I was working there. But then, of course, we've also had this amazing counter push of, you know, the teenagers kind of rising up against this stuff. And we had a number of protests on campus while I was there where the college president was really supportive, where, you know, faculty were actually sending out emails and saying, if you want to step out of class, there will be no judgment on that and so on. So that was interesting. I hope that I'll look back and I'll think I was there at the time when this started to change. But, you know, we will see.
That'll yet be written. Jessie, what was your experience?
So, I was quite lucky. I didn't see a single gun like I expected to actually be confronted with something that I don't particularly want to see, and I didn't have that experience at all. So I was actually quite relieved, that I didn't have to deal with it. And we met a lot of people that felt the same way as us. So that was just really soothing. We could get about with our shopping and not have to worry about... we were in a really good area, so we didn't have to worry about those kinds of that kind of violence.
You both have mentioned a couple of things that you said, and I was surprised by that. What was the biggest surprise when you went to America from what you expected it to be? Jessie, if we start with you.
Yeah, so... I had to watch my language a lot, so not swearing, but making sure that I say things super clearly and not use Australianisms or any slang. So I couldn't go to the servo, I had to go to the gas station. And made sure that I used common words that everybody would understand, and make sure that I thought critically about what vegetable I wanted and what it was called.
Yeah,
So,
right.
Yeah. So it was a lot of little things, and I guess they sold a lot of wine at the supermarket and in the chemist, and I thought that was weird.
Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly coming from here it would be, I imagine.
Yeah.
James, what really surprised you?
So I have one which is I shouldn't have been surprised if I'd done even a tiny bit of research. I would have known, but Seattle is just a beautiful place. So it's very, very green. There are trees everywhere. It feels much more densely wooded than any Australian city that I can imagine. There's a lot of water. It's on a lake, and there's the kind of two cities on either side of the lake, so you're crossing the lake all the time. I think I had probably something a little bit more like LA or New York in my head, and so I arrived and it was this kind of beautiful place with water and mountains and trees, and so that was really nice. Having a squirrel in my backyard most days and kind of waking up and seeing him running around out there was pretty cool as well. So that was one thing that if I'd done even the tiniest bit of research before going, that would not have been a surprise. Something else that again probably shouldn't have been a surprise, but it kind of catches you in a way, was the homelessness in Seattle. So that's very confronting. This is one of the wealthiest places in the world. You know, this is where Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates live. This is where profits from Microsoft and Amazon come back to. And yet there are people living in the street on every block in the city. There are thousands and thousands of homeless people. Every time you drive the freeway, you see tents and camps. And that was really confronting for me, just to kind of know that I've talked a little bit about some of the great things about American culture. I think one of the problems that American culture has, it just has such a sense of individual freedom and individual rights and all of that sort of thing, that there's this sense that sometimes people fall on hard times and that's their own fault and we have no responsibility to help them. And so that's a problem that's kind of sparking up in Seattle now, is there's a bit of political action around what's going to be done about the homelessness problem, whether it's right to ask a company like Amazon that has really at least indirectly driven property prices through the roof, whether it's right to ask them to help support homeless people and all of that sort of thing. But day to day, I'd heard about it in San Francisco. I didn't expect to see it on the scale that I did in Seattle.
Certainly sounds like it was a very interesting time to be in America. James Riggall, he's a Fullbright Scholar. He's spent the last 9 months or so in the US learning things. I'm sure he'll bring those back to his work he does here in Tassie. Also, Jessie Martin was over there joining him for a couple of months. Thank you both so much for coming in and having a chat.
Thanks, Pia.